Welcome to the Aconic Podcast with me, Soon Yu, your host. The Aconic Podcast features candid conversations with successful Asian and AAPI leaders who share their personal journeys of challenges and triumphs. The Aconic Podcast is brought to you by the Asian American Foundation, by Gold House, and by the founders of the Asian Alumni Chapter of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and is made possible through the generous support of Altos Ventures.
I don't think I've ever talked about this, that, what was really hard was disappointing my family. And I just felt like, I was supposed to be the Catholic good girl. I was supposed to be the one that they really believed in my capabilities. And so no matter how hard it was, I said, I've got to make sure that my parents remain proud about what I do.
Welcome to the Aconic Podcast. I'm very excited to welcome Sheila Marcelo to the podcast today. Sheila, welcome.
Thank you, Soon. Excited to be here.
Oh, I'm super excited. You came recommended from somebody who I love, Manny Maceda, the former chair and CEO of Bain & Company. And he said, boy, if we could get one person, get Sheila. So he's very specific.
He's such a great friend.
Oh, I mean, if karma, is transferred between you two, oh my goodness, we're in for such a fun episode today. So this is exciting for me. For our audience, many of you are probably very familiar with Sheila. She has won incredible accolades and has been recognized through so many important institutions and magazines and whatnot. But currently, she is the CEO of Ohai.ai. And we'll get into what Ohai is, but I think it's very exciting. I'm looking forward to its scaling, right? But also very well known for being the former CEO and founder of care.com, a really important website and online service and platform that's helping families across the world, really. And it's super exciting. Importantly, she is one of the founding board members of TAF, which is one of the sponsors for this specific podcast. So we are very grateful for everything you're doing for TAF, because that allows us to change the narrative and share stories like we are doing today. I think recently you were included in the top female founders list for Inc. And I think this is really amazing. You were recognized by the president of the Philippines and was awarded the most prestigious award in the Philippines, which is the Filipino Heritage Award. When I had the opportunity to do research, I watched a few of your podcasts. I even saw some of the keynotes that you gave. And thank you. You enriched my life. I learned so much. And you are such an incredible leader that really speaks from the idea of both empathy, experience-based empathy, and being mission-driven. And that's allowed you to be kind of a serial entrepreneur that's allowed you to infuse both your values, but also, I think, purpose. And I think one of the main areas that you have been able to bring, I think, technology to what you have empathy for is what I call being a champion for the families, right? And I think you described them as chief household officers? I love that, CHOs. So I'm one of the CHOs. I'm a co-CHO, right? So this is great. So you're speaking to me. And here's, I think, one of the most important stats. There have been, in the history of the U.S., I don't know if you know this, Sheila, 12,000 IPOs. In that number of 12,000, there have only been 20 plus women who have founded a company and led it as CEO to an IPO. And you are one of those 20 plus. What an incredible accolade. So anyway, for our audience, that's Sheila.
Wow, what an honor. Thank you for such a heartfelt intro. Thank you, Soon. Excited to be here.
You're welcome. And again, thank you for spending some time with us. We always love, because this is a hero's journey, we love starting at the beginning of the journey. And for you, that began in the Philippines. And I think, when I was doing the research, I love how you kind of described your parents as animals. So can you maybe give us understanding how your parents actually fit the two animals, but how they were actually contrasting and how that actually helped you grow up to be somebody who I think is very multifaceted?
Yeah. What's so interesting, Soon, is I grew up in a country where most people don't know of the Asian countries. The Philippines has one of the narrowest gender gap, according to the World Economic Forum report. And it's a matriarchal culture, a lot of strong women. And so, of course, Amy Chua's a seminal book of kind of describing tiger moms or tiger mothers. My mom was definitely a tiger mom, and I wear that with a proud badge. She taught me a lot of strength and grit, and just confidence. I was also raised with four brothers, so I'm very comfortable around boys and men. And then my father was a teddy bear dad, as I often described him, very nurturing and kind, loved to cook for us.
Mm.
Didn't So I didn't grow up with the normal stereotypes of gender roles. I think both my parents felt comfortable in their feminine and masculine, as we would call it. And so for me growing up, I saw this incredible partnership and love between the two of them. I remember when we celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, so many Filipino families that saw their love really started as elementary school sweethearts. Just talk about how invaluable the authenticity of their love from the very beginning and partnership. And so being raised by parents, and I saw that, I saw the power and the ability of just being myself and bringing my whole self and my authenticity to whatever I did. That I can both be nurturing. I could also be strong, and I could have the grit and confidence and all of it that my parents really taught.
I love how you've married kind of the best of it all, right? I mean, like the strength of your mom, the nurturing of your dad. And the Philippines is such a unique culture within
Yes.
Asia. It is so
Yeah.
strongly matriarchal, and I love that about it. It is one of the most strongly Catholic and family orientated
Yeah. Yeah.
cultures that you will ever meet. And so the idea of family and big families,
Big
actually,
family. Yeah.
not small families, big families is very much part of that culture also. And I was really curious. I think having the idea that I think your dad said to you early on, you could do anything, and like if
Yeah.
you're interested in STEM or if you want to be an entrepreneur, there are no holds bar, so to speak, in terms of what roles that you can take as a female. And both the culture and your dad kind of encourage that. Yet at the same time, I think your parents, and maybe it came from the tiger mom side, wanted you to make sure you were successful. You were always going to be well fed, and so part of that also laid some constructs and some expectations about what you do with your career. So you kind of had both the freedom of exploring, but also some expectations to make it at a certain level. Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair. It is interesting that I didn't have the gender stereotypes growing up, as I mentioned. And that, as you pointed out, my father taught me math very early alongside my older brothers and didn't ever hold me back with my abilities. In fact, when I was 3 years old, recently I went to a dinner and they said, when did you first realize, it was like an icebreaker at a dinner, that you felt seen or valued? And I said, I go back when I was 3, and my father would give me an American newspaper to read out loud, and eventually had me read in front of his friends, and pride that he took of just encouraging always. And then, of course, at the same time, feeling that nurturing hug that he did. And so I just felt this sense of such incredible love growing up, and just a belief in being seen as a young girl. And I think so many girls, you know, uh, aspire to have that in their life, to build that kind of inner confidence. And then my mother always had this wish, as Asian families, and they were entrepreneurs, and they went through difficulties soon, right? There's ups and
Mm.
downs in an entrepreneur, and they always wanted the best for us. So they had designated professions for all of us, where when you're growing up and in society and you have a lot of risk, they always felt like if you're a doctor, if you're a dentist, if you're a lawyer, if you're an engineer, but God forbid if you're an entrepreneur, please don't do that because there's too much risk. And so that 3-year-old who was, very loquacious, I was very, confident as a little kid. My parents were like, oh my God, you can win any argument. You should be a lawyer. So really tried to encourage that. And of course, I went on to go to law school and realized that what I really loved was building and creating things in entrepreneurship. But that blend of how my parents raised me has obviously always stayed with me. And it's something that I aspire many women have access to because soon I feel very incredibly fortunate that, and I tear up around this, that I had a father who really believed it, you know? And of course, mothers, and I'm a mother too, mothers are always there for their children. And the fact that my father just saw me and the strength in me as a young girl has always stayed.
Wow, that's so moving to have somebody in your corner always, right? And
Always, always.
always in your corner.
Yes,
And that gives you that boost of confidence.
that's right.
Um, and when I'm listening to you talk about your parents, I get a sense of both strength and warmth, right? That they wanted you to be strong, but they also understood the idea of um, looking out for each other. And I think that gave you a lot of confidence to not only not eventually be a lawyer, but really to pursue the dream of being an entrepreneur. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I think there's so much that happens before you actually get to law school that I think is very interesting. Um, I love the idea that you were asked to basically stand up and speak in front of your, father's friends, and that taught you everything from public speaking. I think American English, which I think English is a one of the national languages in the Philippines, but the idea of, embracing the American version of that, I think is really important and probably helped you. I think it also paved the way for when you guys actually lived in Houston for a while. Is that right? And then you came back to Philippines. But talk about this idea of being Filipino, going to Houston, being sort of having some identity kind of, adjustment there, and then coming right back to the Philippines. How did that sort of shape your thinking?
I would definitely say as a child, I was a little confused. I came to the US. When you move into cultures and you're a young kid, I remember thinking, gosh, everyone looked similar and alike. And I was acclimating to that. There's definitely an insecurity of going as an immigrant to school and feeling like there's a different language being spoken or signals. Even though I spoke
Mhm.
English, there are nuances and idioms that I couldn't completely track or understand. But the nice thing too is that the sense of being Filipino, and you said the emphasis on family, not only to support each other, but there's also a sense of broader family that we assimilated in a sense of
Mm.
community, and really welcoming of so many cultures and open to that was just part of our Filipino culture, which is why I think the Philippines is one of the largest exporters of laborers around the world in any kind of service industry, caregiving, hospitality. There's a sense of such a welcoming and nurturing aspect of that. And so I think that helped a lot to make friends. So we came to Houston as my parents were as an entrepreneur's visa, and my parents were looking into actually technology that expelled oil, or, we were trying to figure out energy from coconut because my family was everything to do with coconut. Every branch, every, leaf, husk, we turned into coal. But my parents had a vision back then that the husk was actually not great for the environment because of the breathing of it. So they were trying to figure out how do we expel it from the coconut to get oil. And there was an American family who suggested that the technology could be used in Texas. So we went when we were young. My parents just fell in love with America. I mean, they just were like, oh my God, it was worldwide open for entrepreneurs. They felt like there's so many incredible businesses to build. And so they decided to stay. And then they sent us to the Philippines. The best gift soon that my parents gave me is that when I was in fifth grade, my youngest brother and I were too young to go to boarding school, to an American school in the Philippines. And that's where my older four siblings went. They gave us the gift of a year in the in the province of the Philippines called Candelaria, Quezon, where my parents are from. And that's where I really assimilated back into the culture. I relearned the language. I had such like really acceptance and embracing of who I was as a Filipino. And so that was really beautiful as a child. And I still speak the language fluently. And of course, it also allowed me to really understand what it meant to be a global citizen, even
Mhm.
though in my mind, I was already American in some sense, right? It was still understanding the Filipino culture, but this sense of broadness that really then I went on to international boarding school. And then I came to the United States for college from there. So really opened my mind in such a broad way.
Wow, and I love how you kind of toggled back and forth. You grew up in the Philippines. I think at age 5 you came to the US, and for most of elementary you were in the US, and I guess you were able to spend a year not going to a boarding school, but in the rural part of the Philippines. And I think
Oh,
you went to Brent International
I did.
for middle school and high school, and
Yes, I
that's a very well known school. So that I, obviously you did well there because you were accepted into one of the Seven Sisters, right, into Mount Holyoke. And so, talk about the idea of what was it like, trying to apply to the U.S. from the Philippines, and then how was your first experience being back into the U.S. And college?
Yeah, one of my most important role models in my life is my sister, my older sister. I get emotional talking about it too because she was like my second mother. And so she graduated valedictorian and got into so many schools. And then my next brother graduated valedictorian because of her
Wow.
footsteps. She went to Mount Holyoke. So then he followed to the Northeast to go to college. And then my next brother was valedictorian and also went to college in the US. And then, of course, I felt this pressure. I also became valedictorian and then I followed my sister's footsteps. So my sister was really the inspiration for us. Now, obviously, my mother had always a dream and a vision for us to get educated in the US. And so she had such this incredible way of inspiring all of us to achieve in excellence and that it was doable. She was really the one who like forged taking risk for us as siblings. And just she was like, I'm going to school in the United States. And of course, with my mother's encouragement and dream. So we just really followed her footsteps. So I feel very fortunate I went to Mount Holyoke and followed my sister.
Wow, having siblings, having a mom, having a dad that are incredible role models and support systems. I mean, I think both there's a lot of pressure, but
Def-
it's also a lot of support. So it's sort of, double edged in some ways. But that led you to Mount Holyoke. And I think for me, one of the most important, I think, events in your life was, I suppose, meeting your husband. Can you
Yes.
talk about that? The romance, the the this is a bit of
Yeah.
a rom-com here we're gonna get into, but I love it. And by
Yeah.
the way, and before we got on, we had a couple of technical issues, and your resident technician was your husband, and he helped sort of basically get us set up. So I know he's been an integral part of your life, but I think how you guys began and what happened when you began and how that actually shaped a lot of your life and even shaped some of the things that you did in your career. It all started with, I think, you beelining with each other at a party, basically, right?
He's absolutely the sweetest man. So we met and it's still in existence today. I went to Mount Holyoke and he went to Yale University and he co-founded an organization called Kasama, which means coming together. Kasama means French friends with us. And I helped start Liga Filipina, which is the Filipino organization of Mount Holyoke. So we got invited as an organization. Yale, for the first time, was starting, it's called the Filipino Intercollegiate Networking Dialogue, called FIND. Of course, I teased him after that was like find a date, but it was Northeast
It was literally
colleges.
find you.
Yeah. It was like Northeast colleges were brought together at Yale University for the first time. And this was in 1991. I think it was 91. Yes, 91. And brought us together. It was around April. And that's when we first met. And I remember tapping him on the shoulder, trying to find out where to eat. And he turned around. We both really knew. I was like, wait, really special human being.
Wait, you forgot to mention you had that instant connection, but you were both with other dates at,
Yeah.
at this event, right?
And the gentleman that I was dancing with actually ended up going to business school with us years later.
Oh no.
But
Small
my
world.
such a gentleman soon. So I then invited him to come up to Mount Holyoke the following 2 weeks later, I think, for the International Food Festival. And I remember calling him because he was the organizer. Lo and behold, I didn't know that he didn't tell anybody else. So he came up and I had like a table in the front at the food festival reserved for the Yale students for the Filipino organization. And I said, where's everybody else? And then later he told me he didn't want to be distracted. So he didn't tell anybody else. And that the second, and he didn't actually know that I was
Distracted from what? Basically from
distracted of just spending
romancing you.
me. And then the second thing is he actually went up to the boy that I was dancing with to just say, "You're actually interested in her," just to make sure. And he's such a gentleman. But anyway, so we stayed through the food festival, and the best story soon is that he helped me clean up, and then we went on a date to IHOP. He took me to IHOP. And then, but at the dinner, he really surprised me, and he said, there's been a tragedy in my life. I've lost my dad, my mom, my brother, and I just want you to know, that I'm really interested in you. And
Wow.
I
First
a
date.
lot of tragedies in my life, and I have to tell you, with that kind of vulnerability, I fell in love with him on the spot, and I felt like, oh my God, I'm going to care for this man, and I knew it, and I remember going back to my room and telling my college friends, like, this could be the guy that I end up marrying. Like, I just felt it.
Were you a sophomore, junior, or what year were you in?
I was a sophomore, and he was,
Wow.
yeah.
And he was a junior. Okay.
Yeah, we've been now married 33 years this past August. Yeah. So, and then I got pregnant though. So
Yes.
yeah, that was not planned.
Let's let the audience understand when we say she got pregnant, this was not like, 10, 20, 30 years later. We're
No.
talking days, like 90 days.
No, yes. So we knew each other 3 months, and then I got pregnant, and I remember I was doing an internship at JP Morgan in New York, and he had actually given up his internship in California to be with me that summer. So he took a job at Yale University, and we were dating. I remember calling him and saying, "Oh my gosh, I went up to the clinic and it's a hot pink and I'm pregnant." And he said, "Come grab the train in New Haven." And then when I got there, I said, "What are we going to do?" And he said, we're going to get married. I said, I mean, like, of course I'm shocked. And again, he did two things soon. It's such a gentleman thing to do. He got on the phone with my dad, and my dad said, "What are your intentions?" And he said, "My intention is to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage," which was the right thing to do. He wasn't assuming anything. And then at our wedding, even though my parents were very depressed because we got married quickly that summer so we can both go back to school, it was, really fast-paced wedding. I guess they call it like a
Shotgun wedding.
wedding, right? And his family, in Tagalog, there's a word that says hook or pikot. They thought that like I had married the Yaley and got pregnant on purpose. So my parents were very sad at the wedding. And I remember when they dropped us off at the hotel, he leaned in the window and he said to my parents, "I want you to know that I will follow every dream that you've had for her, and she will go to law school." And I've got her, and my parents teared up. They were like, "Oh my God." So my parents, so lived with me for 20 years, lived with us for 20 years, 21 years actually. And he's become so close because he had lost his parents. And he treats my parents like his. So it's just been beautiful.
During the height of the Asian hate crimes, I was left with a sense of disbelief and anger. These feelings prompted me to write a Forbes article titled, "Who Owns the AAPI Brand?" It's clear that branding such a diverse community is difficult. Yet in the absence of a cohesive brand narrative, derogatory stereotypes and racial slurs were created. Fortunately, the AAPI community did come together and form TAF, the Asian American Foundation, to not only combat Asian hate, but to also share positive narratives that fight bias and promote belonging. TAF has launched numerous programs to support this effort, including the Aconic Podcast. Please visit TAF.org to learn more, and to subscribe to this podcast, please visit aconicpodcast.com. Join me in supporting TAF, because together we make a difference.
I want to pause here because there's so many emotions and thoughts that come to mind when you describe the situation. One, it's not common, okay, that you meet somebody and 3 months later you're pregnant and you decide the outcome, it's getting married.
Yes.
And I must imagine both the stress, the sense of pressure, the sense of, uncertainty, both in terms of what's the future hold for you, but also this idea of, I only know I've known this person for 3 months. All the signals are right, but you just don't know in 3 months. Most people don't.
Yeah.
Well, that's not fair. I actually met my wife and we got engaged in 19 days, but okay, that's a whole separate story. Okay, yeah.
Possible. It's possible.
It is possible, right? But I was a lot older than you. I was not 22 years old. You were probably how old? You were probably like 20 years old at that point.
I was
20 years old at that time. I did this when I was 40, so a little
Yeah.
different, right? There's also probably, honestly, a taboo, in a Catholic culture to have a pregnancy out of wedlock, and you had to probably deal with that. I think probably on a personal level, the loss of innocence. This idea that, I- I'm here 20, I'm supposed to have fun, I'm supposed to go experience all these crazy things. And the last thing I want to sort of have the audience understand is what it's like to go to a prestigious college where you know that this isn't the end for you. You want to go to grad school. So you know that you have to keep up your academic load and the grades and the expectations of that. At the same time, being pregnant, having a baby, and then walking into class with a baby stroller or a baby carriage and putting the baby next to you while you're taking notes. And then if the baby cries, you're probably having to run out, or if you have to feed. I mean, I can't even imagine that at age 21. And you were going through all of that along with brand new relationship
Yeah.
and potentially letting your parents down. I mean, it's just to unpack all of that. And that happens so early on in your life.
Yeah.
I just want to take a breath and say, you're amazing.
Oh my gosh. Well, so, I mean, maybe just to describe, I don't think I've ever talked about this, that what was really hard was disappointing my, and I just felt like, I was supposed to be the Catholic good girl. I was supposed to be the one that like, they really believed in my capabilities. And so no matter how hard it was, I said, I've got to make sure that my parents remain proud about what I do. So in those early days, I didn't want to disappoint them anymore. So I worked really hard. My husband had experienced trauma in his life. And so I had to be the breadwinner. And I just embraced that. And then being a young mom. And then what was probably hard is going to Mount Holyoke. I think as a feminist college, not everyone understood why I decided to keep the baby. So it was hard. And some of my best friends today really supported me when we were at Mount Holyoke, and there were others who just didn't understand. So yes, it was a very hard journey. But I think what I started to realize through that turmoil were a couple of things. I realized how important family was soon. It actually is what put me in a trajectory spiritually around pursuing things that help people's lives because of what I had gone through. And then my career choices were always about helping families because I realized, gosh, this is so hard. And being proximate to those issues made me realize that being alone without support really impacts my children, impacts my family. And so how do I take the skill set that I have and the gift of education and the gift of being able to help people? So and that I often describe to people, being proximate to hardship is what often is the source of inspiration to actually find solutions to help other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that really was one of the reasons for care.com is that difficult period and realizing that we didn't have a lot of support, and that we, could be helping other people, because then from Mount Holyoke, I did end up going to law school because I said I didn't want to disappoint my parents. And that was hard. I did my JD MBA. And then because I was also the breadwinner, I worked at Monitor Company during school. I didn't sleep very much. So I was juggling a lot of different things beyond the program and being a mom. But that's really soon, those hardships were the reason that I started to realize more people, needed help from like a company like care.com. And then the second thing that happened during this period of stress is that I was hospitalized at a young age due to stress. And I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. They couldn't figure out what it was, and it was really stress related. And that's when I started to realize that I needed to take care of myself to support my family. And at a very young age, I started meditating. That became such a gift for me around serving people, both in leadership as well as serving my family, that I've evolved a lot around that, and really learning the humility at a young age of self-awareness. So that those two, I now really believe that difficulty and pain are often sources of inspiration that allow us to serve people. So,
Well, that's the whole crux of why we are doing this podcast. Is exactly what you just shared. I was actually thinking about when you first explained and how your parents were at your wedding and they were disappointed, and I'm sure that was preceded by other conversations of disappointment. It wasn't just at the wedding. This was
yeah,
probably, for your entire lead up to your wedding, basically. And then feeling ostracized by being in a very feminist college and being both an anomaly, but one that probably went way against many of people's grains and their unconscious bias about it, right? And having to stand strong in that. We're talking about like rock bottoms. You may have had a couple, but that definitely was not a high point in your life. And yet at
yeah,
some point, in some ways it was, because you met the love of your life. You met a
yes,
wonderful individual.
yes,
And I think there is like moments of incredible sunshine by
mm,
one. I'm sure it probably was very clarifying for you and your realization of the need of your family. They probably had to come to grips with, this is not the way we scripted it. This is not the way we had planned it. This is not what we had imagined. How do we overcome that? And then still embrace our daughter because we love her. And then I love what you're saying. The idea that when we go through those low moments, it's not only how we pick ourselves up, and for you, it's finding the idea of, family and support and all that, but how that plants a important kernel or seed in our career trajectory, our life purpose, what we care about, and how that might manifest later, which it did for you in care.com. The other thing you mentioned, I think, is very important, because I remember my first year at Bain. I love Bain, okay? 'Cause I had Manny on, obviously.
yeah, yeah,
But, I felt like an imposter. I was
yes,
22 years old trying to tell people that are 40 how to run their business and, who they should lay off. And I was just stressed beyond, and I had
yes.
in my desk, I had shirts that I would change into because I slept underneath the desk, all that, right? And
I
I got
remember.
my first 2 ulcers. And I just remember that the only thing I could do is take medication and just suffer through it. But this idea of, hey, what mental health, you just gotta, that's what everyone's doing. You gotta basically grin and bear it. And I think this idea of investing in yourself was really important. And this was in between when you had that episode where I think you said you were traveling to like 6 countries and you were
Yeah,
basically not sleeping. That was in between college and eventually going to
correct.
law school, correct?
That's right. That's right.
So you were not even doing, I mean, it's funny, you actually took time in between law school. A lot of people just graduate and go to law school. What was the decision to work and then go back into law school? And then actually once in law school, you kind of said, yeah, this is interesting, but no, that's not my life passion. I actually want to be an entrepreneur. And I mean, and you didn't go to any normal law school. You went to probably one of the top law schools in the world. And then you just happened to go to just one of the best business schools in the world. Can you talk a little bit about that transition of, doing consulting,
Sure.
epiphany of in terms of investing in yourself, and then all of a sudden going to law school and then kind of shifting gears?
Yeah. So, I was always bold and ambitious, and I always pushed myself. And so I had enough credits from high school that I did the international baccalaureate. So I was able to take a semester off and have the baby and study for the LSATs. And
Okay, good.
that's kind of what I did in New Haven when I gave birth. And so I got into Harvard Law. But then when I got in, I wasn't sure I wanted to be a lawyer, but I made a promise that I would go to law school.
So you deferred.
I deferred for 2 years.
Oh.
I worked in strategy consulting, telecom consulting, and that's really why I got into technology. I was working at an economic consulting firm, and we had these partners that was working on the Orion satellite, and I really wanted to get on their project and wanted to find out how we mapped out transponders and where the potential demand was for the satellite. And so I then decided, wow, I really love this technology. That then I shifted to another company that helped pretty much study telecom consulting specifically in developing countries because I always had this tie to the Philippines. So, but the reason I took that economic consulting first job, and it was a litigation consulting firm, was to kind of say, well, I think I'm interested in business, but maybe I want to go to law school. I mean, maybe I want to be a lawyer. So it was allowing me to first experiment of what I wanted to do. The other thing I did was really, I wanted to be bold around, we knew that I got into Harvard Law and we were going to move to Massachusetts. So I pushed us to buy a home so that we could start putting the kids to school. And you can imagine had no money. My husband was a social worker, and I was working in strategy consulting. So I needed to save money and buy a home so that when we got into grad school, right, we could take out loans and really support ourselves and save enough money. So I was just really just trying to make it all work. And so I did my first year of law school. It was very, very hard. But I started to realize, though I love the study of law, it was hard because of the juggle. I love the study of law. I just was really drawn into business. And I applied to one school because that was the only school I could walk across the
Not
bridge.
many options.
So I applied to Harvard Business School, and thank God I got in. And those 4 years with that program was really difficult. People always ask me, they're like, wow, you got into great schools. And it was hard because in the first couple years, I didn't have a car. And so I would walk across the bridge. And remember, I grew up in the Philippines, so I'm a tropical girl, and it was cold and I couldn't afford the right shoes, and I didn't have winter boots, and I didn't have the right coat. And we were just trying to make it.
And your child, Ryan, was a toddler, basically.
Yes. Yes. And we were fortunate that he got into the daycare at the Harvard Business School campus so that we could make it work. And my husband, the first year of the law program, was working as social worker or at City Year that was helping kids. And that was his way of actually dealing with his trauma, was to actually help people. He really opened my eyes around nonprofit work too, and sort of social mission driven things. And that always inspired me. So anyway, so we were in grad school together. He got into Harvard Business School after working at City Year. So we enjoyed our 2 years together while he did 2 years of business
So you
school.
guys got in at the same time?
We did.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so how much serendipity is there? You meet the love of your life. You guys, you stick it through even if you got pregnant so early, and you managed to stay together, have a child. What I think is really interesting is while you're there in business school, along comes number 2.
Yes. Along was Adam.
So you were pregnant with Adam in business school, correct?
Yes. At graduation, I was 7 months pregnant. And,
Wow.
And of course, that actually changed my trajectory too soon. I was going to go to Monitor Company. And then 2 of my professors, because I was pregnant, Linda Applegate, who I adore, and Myra Hart, offered for me to do a fellowship at Harvard Business School for me to teach for a year. 2 courses, building information age businesses. And they don't teach that anymore. I know I'm dating myself. And women building business. Thank God they don't teach that anymore because women do build businesses. But back then, that was a course because we were a minority on campus. But that gave me an opportunity because they knew that I had 2 young kids. I was afraid to go to Monitor because, as you know, consulting's so demanding, right? And by the way, I remember my first job before grad school, I hid the fact that I was a mom because I didn't want to be judged.
You hid the fact. Wow, that must have been tough too.
In my interviews. And so I was just worried that if I worked at Monitor, though they knew that I had Ryan, and then they knew that I was pregnant with the second one, and they really wanted me back. I taught for a year, but that's what really opened my eyes to the internet. I started grading internet business plans while at Harvard. And then I thought, wait, how could I grade these papers and these business plans if I've never operated a company. And that's what drew me in even more so into technology. And so rather than going back to Monitor, I ended up working at UPromise, which was a company that helped families save for college.
I love that. And so it's an interesting path that is influenced a lot by your family situation, your personal family situation,
Every single decision I have made has been about my family.
which is, I think, incredible. And, you know, some people could say, well, that's very limiting. And other people, if you look at you step back and look at what you've done, you could say it's also very fortuitous, right? And maybe it closed one door, but man, it opened so many other doors that you might not have considered, or you might not have been forced to actually even consider. So I think that's really interesting. So you went from teaching, and while you were teaching, you were reading all these business plans, and then I guess one of them caught your attention, which is You Promise. And I think you talked about this in some interviews. What you liked about it was not only was it about technology and the power of technology, but it was also really about improving people's lives. And it really then started to, I think you already had that in you, but especially I think with Ron, but it really fostered this idea of being much more purpose and mission driven with whatever you were doing and intentional about that. Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair. And so I knew that it was in my heart that to pursue something to help families. At You Promise, what I really learned soon as I did this meditation work is I wasn't a great manager or leader. I realized I was so intense coming out of the JD MBA program. I was so intense with people. And I talk a lot about this because I, always felt underestimated as a young Asian American executive because I got promoted at a young age, 29, onto the management team. I had this insecurity of being underestimated that then my demands of other people, that I started underestimating other people. And often, we reflect the same feelings we have about ourselves in the way we treat others.
Mm.
And so I needed to work on that. And I got a coach at a young age. The management team took me out to lunch and said, you have such high potential. We can feel that you care deeply about people, and they were great mentors to me. But your expectation from other people is just way too demanding, not realistic, because I was putting it on myself, right? I was putting all these pressures on myself as a young manager. And so You Promise was such a gift of what it meant to be a good to great leader. And how to help manage people and really care deeply about people, and also observing different management styles at a young age. I always feel very fortunate that management team believed in me to groom me, teach me so much. And I owe so much of where I am today because of their belief.
Your winning formula sounds like in the early parts was to outperform, over deliver, to be
Yes,
very driven.
that's right.
And that's quite normal. And if that's
That's
a
right.
really, to be the tiger career woman, right?
And the pressures that I had of a family taking care of, so I was sort of on this aggressiveness and started to realize that, my own life should not mirror the way that I treat others.
I think what's interesting is later on the teddy bear part of your upbringing was much more
That's right.
emboldened, and it was much more brought to life. And I think what's so tough is that this idea of being driven and being nurturing can feel conflicted, because oftentimes the idea of being nurturing is being patient. It is allowing failure. It's allowing imperfection or messiness or restarts or relearns. And it's very inefficient, especially early on, to grow people. And I have had that tension throughout my entire career also. So I fully feel empathetic with that struggle. And I'm nowhere near where I'd love to be as a manager. That's probably why I do podcasts. So
One of the things I'll add too, though, that was a struggle is I didn't have many role models of that combination of the feminine masculine at work and the nurturing at work. I had an incredible mentor who was our CFO, Joni, and I always watch and observe her incredible masculine side of dealing with men. And she and I would talk about that she didn't have female role models, and thank God I had her, and that we would talk about that. And so you enter the workforce in those early days when there weren't a lot of female role models, and that you felt that toughness and not being nurturing was actually more rewarded. And so you had to kind of fight those stereotypes to say, I can just be me, which of course led to the culture that I wanted to build at care.com. And so there's nothing to blame with that. It's just that that's where society was. And so when you're growing up as a young female leader, you're looking around like, well, what style am I supposed to be? How am I supposed to behave? And so you've got to have to find your own boldness and inner strength to really be, figure out how do you stay true to yourself.
Sheila, you bring up such an important point. I was listening to what you're saying, and it's a really important insight. This idea that we walk into every role we have, and there's unconscious bias that people have. And there's our own unconscious bias about what we think their unconscious bias is. And we have a hard time letting go of our unconscious bias about their unconscious bias. And that heavily influences how we operate because we tend to over torque to try to overcome our unconscious bias of their unconscious bias.
Correct.
Woo!
Yes.
I just picked that up from what you were saying. Like, oh my God, it's not only unconscious bias we deal with, it's our own unconscious bias of what we believe we're being viewed as or being compartmentalized as or whatever, evaluated. Whew. Okay, so I learned something new today. That was good. Thank you, Sheila. I need to think twice about how I think people are thinking about me because I'm sure there's bias in how I view their views of me.
Are you ready to be part of a community that amplifies the voices of Asian leaders in business, government, and the arts? The founders of this podcast are members of the Asian Alumni Chapter of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, whose mission is to empower Asian and AAPI voices in our community. By subscribing to this podcast, you'll stay up to date on the latest Aconic episodes, and importantly, gain exclusive invitations to select Stanford Asian alumni events that can provide useful insights and a powerful network to help you on your personal and professional journeys. Go to aconicpodcast.com and subscribe today. Join us and be a part of a community that's shaping the future of Asian leadership.
In high school, after he graduated, I was by the fridge and I, out of guilt, asked him, have I been a good mom? And his, of course, answer was, I don't know that you were around enough, which was actually true. And it was really a dagger to the heart. But I kind of had this guilt.
Well, let's talk about care.com. Okay, so a lot of your life was leading to this idea of having a child and bringing a car seat into your classroom at Holyoke, and the same thing happened being pregnant and graduating with Adam. I mean, all these probably were struggles to balance and be professional and still be a good mom and a good wife. Oh my God, right? And so you can't do it all by yourself. And you also, on top of that, you talk about this idea that your father had a heart attack and you also needed to figure out a way to make sure that you could take care of him. So you had all these demands that all fed into this idea of you went to the yellow pages and you were looking at the yellow pages for help. That wasn't very effective, was it?
Yellow pages. At the time, there was Craigslist.
Yeah.
It was an 8.5 by 11 flyer that I put up at the library or our church. And it had those little ears that you peeled off that had our phone number. Just really weren't a lot of options, which is what led me to beg my parents to come from the Philippines to take care of Adam. And while they were taking care of Adam, that's when my father fell backwards and had a heart attack. Thank God every day that we were in Massachusetts, so he had great health care. But I often describe it as that's the sandwich that literally in my late 20s, I was sandwiched between trying to
in late 20s, you were already sandwiched, right? You had to worry about your father and your 2 kids.
Yes.
On top of, in the middle, you still have the meat, which is you and your husband. Oh,
that's
wow.
Right. And then, of course, I was promoted at a young age.
Oh, wow.
And so there was so much, which is why the meditation, the coaching, the just really focusing on where is my mental health in all of this? It's crazy. So I had been on this incredible treadmill constantly soon, right? And it's funny, and we can come back to this later, but fast forward, look, care.com came from a sense of being proximate to the issue, inspired by my own journey is in that panini now, right? Even the squeezed cheese and melted cheese, it was like a panini.
Panini, I like that. Yeah.
But I realized in the entire journey of starting care.com and entrepreneurship, of founding, growing, taking it public, exiting, taking it private again, that I've done the meditation and exercise and all of that just to maintain the grind, as opposed to thinking about it of like, where's my body at? Where is my inner soul at? Like, what do I need? And because I was such in caregiving mode and this mental overload of just focus on care, for those in my life. Of course, no pun intended, it was care.com, but I really needed that sabbatical the year of 2020. It was and it actually is what led to my inspiration of this new company. .ai is, how do I take that passion that I had in being proximate to the issue of what families needed, but really start to focus on our mental health as well, not just being able to ask for help, which was care.com, right? But this is now the next layer of the everyday care that we have to do, coordination of care, which is what Ohai. So it's an extension of this, but it's really being able to have the permission to take care of myself too.
I love that you've been consistent and been incredibly mission driven, and the thought of how technology can actually further purpose and mission, and the idea that you have an audience that speaks to your own experience, which is being the chief household officer. You've had to be that age 21, basically. You had to start dawning on the idea that I'm now going to have a household. What the hell does that mean at 21, right? Most people don't worry about that till 30s.
But to be fair, soon, the reason the chief household officer has been always so important to me is my husband has been my partner in life, and he has at times been the chief household officer. And so I have such this deep respect of how we have phased our lives together, and really played different chiefs at different times.
That's true. You're co-chiefs, which I feel like the same way with my wife, right? So it's very wonderful. I want you to talk a little bit also about care.com. And, normally we don't go deep into business in this podcast, but I do think you brought a lot of innovations that are important to the chief household officer, but I also think to the caregivers and really empowering them and making them better. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the innovations that you brought, not only just bringing matchmaking, but what you did for both audiences?
And always been the vision to me to create a B2C and a B2B business to provide care at work to employees. So that's the demand side, right? Consumer as well as employees. And then I had the fortune of being accepted to the Aspen Crown Leadership Program. And we would do readings over, it was a 2-year program over 4 weeks, and we reread philosophers and had an opportunity to ask the question in a very diverse group of 20 leaders, what makes a good society? And that became such an inspiration for me to realize that my platform and my voice was bigger than just the company that I was in. And it started to dawn on me that being Filipina, of course, when I started this, my mother always said that, oh my gosh, did you know that the Philippines is one of the largest exporter of caregivers in the world? And I was raised by a nanny. I started to realize the important role that I needed to play after this leadership program of how to use my voice for advocacy. And so this was pre-Uber days. We knew that we were going to be the largest gig economy. Back then, it wasn't even called the gig economy. But how could we represent caregivers? And I befriended Aijin through 2 women on my team, Laura Esnaola and Cora Newman, who introduced me to Aijin. They inspired me. And so and both of them had sort of social driven hearts and kind of knew what I wanted to do. But really, when Aijin and I came together, I started to realize, so my role is how could I represent caregivers more and better? And so we introduced the, ability for them to access healthcare, make sure that they were not paid below minimum wage on the platform. We ended up buying a payroll company to ensure that they had benefits on Social Security. and other benefits, and that they were treated well as real employees. So many gifts of people in my life, like the Ijins of the world, the Coras, Laura, who inspired me to say, wow, just continue to follow my heart and this core goodness that I have that can really help people. And then I started also talking about the care economy. I started to realize that I had a voice in advocacy in representing, talking about the care economy and driving really overall how women can contribute to the workforce. So I found my voice in all of this, and I'm still doing it. I was at Melinda Gates's. They honored me, and it was so beautiful, where they called me the OG, and they had me help kick it off this year, and it was the first inaugural Care Summit. Of course, I feel like I'm old and dating myself, but to look out in an audience where they're like 300 entrepreneurs in the care industry, helping the care economy, and also venture capitalists, just wow, it just like really filled my heart. Like I just said that this is now a burgeoning industry that's helping millions of people.
You created a whole movement around how to improve and how to scale a sort of a quiet, a forgotten part of the economy, right? And I do think it's apropos that you're Filipino, because there are so many Filipino caregivers. I remember being in Hong Kong, and the weekends they would all get together, and they'd
Yes,
sit and talk, and
that's
it was their
right.
time of socializing. And I love the idea that you brought healthcare and benefits and call it just standard work practices to this industry. And I love the idea that, let's say you work for two families, they both can contribute to your benefits and your healthcare. And I just think all those type of innovations that you brought to kind of make it safe and valued and recognized as a profession is something truly amazing and very powerful. Again, I am very touched by all that you've done. Let's talk a little about Ohai, because you still sort of stayed
Sure.
on the same vein. Describe to our folks listening, what is Ohai?
Yeah, so it is a virtual personal assistant and also an operating system for families. I came up with the idea. It was called My Adam during my care days, and our younger son, as you know, is named Adam.
Adam, right?
Technology wasn't ready. I had the vision of what I call everyday care coordination. So certainly there's care services, which you can get at care.com, but this care coordination of drop off, pick up, delegate between partners, or even co-parenting between divorced parents. How did you coordinate with a caregiver, a grandmother, an aunt, and then all these after school activities? And I found that my own cognitive load. I called it the blue sheet. And it was like, I made it fun. It was like a extracurricular homework sheet that I would always do with the kids. And I would supplement it. And then I had them sign up for Russian School of Math. And then I got them lessons. And my husband and I were always like juggling this. So it was just a lot. And I said to myself, and you would forget things because you're also working full time. And my husband was working full time. So I just knew that this was always a need. And so when I saw the generative AI, and so you go from, the technology developed from prompt engineering to inference and agentic, and we were developing an agentic course using generative AI. And I said to my team, I said, this agentic thing, can we use it to actually be agents to complete tasks for families? And my team got really excited about it soon. So this was February 2023. We interviewed 200 families. We launched a fake website just to test the demand, went through the roof. We were super excited about it. We just started building. And we knew I wasn't planning to build a new AI company, nor was I planning to go back into the care space, to be honest. But I knew my work wasn't done. The technology was ready. Women and families continue to still struggle. And the other thing is female entrepreneurs in AI. Again, I feel like I'm back at it again, trying to say, this is doable. And then I just wrote women over 50 in fast companies saying, I'm going to dispel the stereotypes again. Like I have been doing in my career. I'm going to dispel the stereotypes. I don't care that I'm 54. I'm going to go do this again. And it's going to be very doable because families need it, women need it, and the technology is here.
Well, I love it that this is just a second launch off pad for you. And I personally think what it means is you might be the very first woman to have two IPOs versus just one. that you founded and you led. So I'm very excited to sort of see in the next few years what happened. I love the idea that it's more than generative; it's self-learning. That's what the Gentic is all about, and that you're incorporating all the latest, I think, AI technologies to provide a personal assistant, and I can use the personal assistant to help
Right.
me with my household officer duties. Right?
Add something, 'cause, going back to my history, and I told you how I was stressed out. I ended up in the hospital. One of the things I notice is so many people are developing AI for productivity at work, right? And I've always done the non-sexy thing of productivity at home and how I free up women's time. But I observed something, Dr. Vivek Murthy, our Surgeon General, said one of the biggest epidemics we have is parental stress because it impacts society. When parents are very stressed, our children are stressed. We don't take the time to have meals with them, consistency in reading them a story, um, focusing on their nutrition. It impacts society when we're stressed because we take shortcuts. So that's part of the reason Ohai is really removing this cognitive load so that we can just be and enjoy these moments and actually enhance our experience of being human and using technology to do that. And that's the same thing at care.com. It was technology to allow us to love more and be with our families. And it's exactly the same thing. But now there's the added of having the free time to love ourselves.
Let's talk about loving ourselves. I think I want to relate a story that you shared. I think is really important. We're all work in process in terms of trying to be great parents. There's
Yeah.
no easy formula. There's no textbook, and even if you read a textbook, quite frankly, it's useless, right? And
Yeah.
in part of it, and I love this idea that you're, on that arc and you're doing it. And I think it's kind of come full circle. I think you once, because we all care about being great parents, but
Yeah.
you once asked your son, I believe Ryan it was,
Yes.
yes, am I a great mom? And I think there's an arc where let's face it, we all are trying. It takes a while for even us to get there and for people to understand and appreciate getting there and what it means and the stress of all that. Can you talk about your story about when you asked your son first and then what happened later?
Yeah. So, and there's even a third leg to this story now that I've
Oh, I didn't know there's a third leg.
Yeah.
Okay.
In high school, after he graduated, I was by the fridge and I, out of guilt, asked him, have I been a good mom? And his, of course, answer was, I don't know that you were around enough, which was accurate
Ouch.
and true. And it was really a dagger to the heart. I kind of had this guilt. And then when we went public, we were in a restaurant here in New York and we had bankers, accountants, lawyers, and it was an open mic. Ryan was 21 and he took the microphone, looked straight at me, and as if no one else was in the room, and I was very nervous. And he said, Mom, do you remember that question you asked me in high school? And of course, he repeated the story to everyone and how he answered me. And he said, I just want to tell you. And he looked straight at me soon, and he said, I want you to know that I answered you wrong, and after looking at the millions of people and lives that you have impacted, that I think you're great. Definitely, an affirmation. But part of the third story that I haven't shared is that I was during that moments of stress, we certainly took it out on him as a young child. We weren't as evolved as parents. And as you're pointing out, and then when Adam was born, we decided to completely change our parenting style, because Ryan wanted to sing when he was young. He also wanted to play other sports like football. And so we made him play basketball, which is the stereotypical Filipino sport. We made him play a string instrument. And we ourselves were tiger parents. And I started realizing that raising American kids, it's different. And we altered and evolved our parenting style with Adam. We let him sing. We let him play football. We let him follow what he wanted to do. And so Ryan observed this as he was growing up. And so I could feel the hurt in my son. The grace that he had to give me the gift back to say that I was an incredible mom is such a gift. And now I see this incredible love that he has because I'm a grandmother. He's given us.
Congratulations.
Yeah. He and my daughter-in-law, Chloe, who I adore deeply, and I actually wrote her a tribute of motherhood when she gave birth because I could totally relate with her. I love both of them to pieces, is that just the incredible closeness that we have, and just, again, graceful young man that I have raised my son, and you just give me so much love and appreciation of the evolution as a parent, is just been a gift.
I feel like just flying over Manhattan, giving you a big hug. Because and you and I could talk for so long. There's so many stories that when you share them, they resonate, and I say, I have a similar story, and I would love to just not only share them with you, but bounce ideas. But granted, the audience probably can't stay for 3 hours. But I do want to say thank you for one. You gave me a real insight about the idea of how much unconscious bias we have, and how that hurts us about other people's unconscious bias. You talked so courageously about the idea of mental health and stress, and wanting to just be upfront about it, recognize our limitations around it, our need for help, and being able to seek help for that, and the patience that we should have with each other. And this is a message to the audience, that even if we didn't do it perfect the first time, we're still evolving, and we can still grow, and we can still learn. And you are an absolute testament to doing that. And it's such a powerful testament. And thank you so much for being as vulnerable and as courageous as you've been today. I feel very moved, and I can't wait to watch this interview many times, because I know there'll probably be other insights I'm going to get that I being at the moment, I probably don't have right now. You're such a powerful guest. And as you think about trying to have other powerful guests on, is there one or two people that we should interview that also can share stories such as yours that would really help the API community?
I know I'm going to be biased like Manny. Loida Lewis is a beautiful soul, just what she has had to go through in grit. And I'll let her unfold her own story. It's beautiful. And she's written a book, Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun?
I love it.
And then my dear friend, Dado Banata, who I'm sure will be joined by his wife, Maria, if you can actually coordinate that interview. He is a powerhouse that has given so much back to the world in what he has invented in semiconductors, and we enjoy it today in the graphical user interface that we do on phones. He has been an inspiration.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for those recommendations. We didn't even get to talk about the founding of TAF, and that'll be. I'm going to have you on again. We could talk about that's a whole conversation and all the advice you probably give to not just parents but to the AAPI community.
Oh my gosh! Well, if you wanted to do that, you would definitely need to have Lilu on. So.
Yes, absolutely. We need Lirio, of course. He's one of the founders with you. So again, Sheila, thank you so much for your grace, for your kindness, and for giving always to this community, and for saying yes immediately. I very much enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Listen to all episodes of Aconic on aconicpodcast.com. You can also catch new episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.